Guten Yardening, everybody! If you've followed our channel for any length of time, you know that we love a good sweet potato harvest. And we've harvested quite a few sweet potatoes and potatoes this year, but one of the harvests that we never showed you was our Ruth Stout sweet potatoes that we grew in our compost bin. So I'm going to show you that harvest right now. It's a nice quick harvest, and at the end, I'm going to talk to you about some of the lessons that we took from that for this coming season. Well, today we're finally ready to get started with our sweet potato harvest, and these sweet potatoes are right in the compost bins behind me. These are the sweet potatoes that we planted in a modified Ruth Stout type bed at the top of our compost. So we placed hay inside, then we dug down into the hay and created a spot for some of our sweet potatoes to go in. Now this is the Hannah variety of sweet potato, and we'll see how well they do. The thing is, we came out here to check and see how they were performing, and the reason we're harvesting today is we noticed that the voles had somehow managed to get into these compost bins, even though, well, they're pretty tall bins, but the first set that we looked at had some pretty substantial vole damage, and we don't want to lose all of them to the voles, so we're going to get out here and harvest. We know we have some size in here, but we don't really know how well they're going to perform overall. So come with us as we get started harvesting some of our sweet potatoes. All right, now it's a little bit of a tight fit getting back into here, but that's okay. This is the bin where we have our sweet potatoes growing. And you can see right down in here, the first of the sweet potatoes that we just checked on, again, to make sure there wasn't anything happening. And what you should note about this is a pretty substantially large sweet potato. Take a look at the size in comparison with my hand, but you do see that vole damage right up here. Now, we have quite a few other plants down in here, so it's going to be fun to dig around and see, and hopefully, again, we didn't lose too much to these little voles. But let's go ahead and get started, and I'm going to cut all these greens off and get going. Now, for those of you who are new here to our channel, we are gardening in Zone 5, Wisconsin. Now I think this is going to be a pretty simple harvest. Again, we have this layer of hay right here, and I can actually just pull this layer back just like so, and you can see right below the surface we're getting some of our sweet potatoes already. Now these were planted as transplants instead of just as slips, which means that when we put them in the ground, we actually had roots already growing on them in soil. But here we go, our first one pulled out of here, everything nice and loose, and you can see what I'm talking about. We're going to have some of this damage. I mean, we already know that going in, but the sweet potatoes that are on here that are actually growing well, like these Hannah right here, that is a nice looking sweet potato. So are we going to see a ton of these on here? I don't know yet. This is our first time growing in compost like this and in a Ruth Stout, modified Ruth Stout bed, but I'm thinking that we're going to have some decent sized ones in here as well. Now again, this is earlier than we would want to harvest this. This is not the time we'd like to harvest it. We'd like to wait a couple more weeks at least. You know, as long as we can keep them in the area they're growing, the better. But that vole, those voles that are coming in here aren't going to allow us to do that. So I'm going to pull out the ones that we already know we have. This is the other one that I showed you at the beginning. I mean, we can see again that we have some good size. These Hannahs are a third generation now, so we've already harvested them and grown our own slips from them, and now we're getting some nice returns from those. So these are Guten Yardening sweet potatoes. I'm going to dig around just a little bit down in here to see if we got anything else headed down a little bit farther. You can see that the hay on here, we didn't really add much to it. The hay on here is down to, I would say, about 4 inches in depth from where we started, which was about 8 inches, I would say, of hay. All right, let's head down to this one here in the corner. Again, I can move back our hay and just do a gentle, easy pull up here to see what all is attached. And it does look like the voles have good taste. They've got right to our biggest one here as well, but we do still have a couple of smaller ones on here still to go. Now, one of the things my wife and I discussed about growing like this is that we didn't really get
even the transplants all the way down into the compost below. So they had to work their way through some of this hay. And since this was first year hay, I'm not sure that that was the wisest decision. I'm wondering if that's exactly how we should have done this in terms of the quantity of what we're getting. I mean, these actually still look pretty nice. You can see a little bit of damage here, but these still look pretty nice even though they're a little bit smaller. But I'm wondering if, and you can see, take a look at the size of the roots on here. These roots really are not all that substantial. So I'm thinking maybe that was our issue here. I mean, the vole damage aside, I'm thinking maybe our real issue was we didn't give them, even as transplants, enough of a good start to get those solid root structures in the ground, producing even more sweet potatoes. Take a look at this. We've got a nut. It looks like a walnut that maybe a squirrel came along and buried in here. No thank you. Well, there's one right down in here. Well, one of the other things I'm noticing as I'm digging down in here is that I'm not seeing much happening down below the hay, and that is actually something I kind of expected going in here, that we'd have a little bit more. But that goes back to what I was talking about earlier, because most of the time our sweet potatoes do tend to dig down in there a little bit farther. So that's just something else that we're learning about this attempt at this method of growing. Well, this is the last of the sweet potatoes that we have growing in here. Again, same results, not really large sweet potatoes, definitely some pretty major damage to this one. I'll look down and see if there's anything below, and nothing really below. So I think we've learned quite a bit about growing in this style simply from this really quick harvest. For one thing, it was really easy to access just by moving the hay apart. It was really easy to access any sweet potatoes that were down here. But the second thing is, if we want more size, one, we have to be able to leave it longer. That we know. And two, I think we have to do a better job in this method of getting initial root contact with this good compost beneath here, because really all of our other vegetables, when they're growing in the compost here, are performing really well. Well, that was a really quick sweet potato harvest. I'm going to show you both sides of what we just harvested. On the right hand side, we have our vole damaged sweet potatoes. So there's a good amount of loss there. On the left hand side, though, we still have some really nice sweet potatoes. And remember, this was all an experiment. This was all our attempt to grow these in a way we've never done so before. And so there's nothing disappointing about this other than the fact that we wish we could have stopped that from happening. But that being said, clearly we have the capability of growing some really nice sweet potatoes. We just have a few little quirks to work out.
One other thing that I noticed on here and I didn't mention is actually we were getting some sprouting coming out of this sweet potato as well. So some new growth coming out of here, which is definitely not something I would have expected at this point, because it's fairly early on. I mean, it's only been in the ground here or in the compost bin for just over 3 months. Well, this was definitely an interesting experiment for us, and the results were a little bit mixed, I would say, but I think there are some other lessons that we can take from growing in this method. You know, when we plant our potatoes in the Ruth Stout bed, we start with more hay and we continually add throughout the season. Well, we didn't do that in this case, so we started with about 8 inches of hay, and by the end we were at 4 inches, and we didn't add more to the top. I think that was a mistake on our part. Additionally, each year that we've been planting our Ruth Stout potatoes, we've seen an increase in production because our hay gets more and more composted, and as it breaks down, that area gets healthier and better for growing. Well, again, this was first year hay, so I think that's something else we have to take into consideration. And I'll say one more lesson that we should take from this is that if at all possible, we want to leave those sweet potatoes in the ground much longer, especially here in Zone 5. We want to get them in the ground for 4 months if we can make that happen. And in order to do that, we've got to stop the evil empire, because that's something that forces our hand in a way to pull them up before they're ready. there's a lot that we can do, in my opinion, to improve this experience next season. And so we'll see if the lessons that we learned this season can translate to better production next season. Well, we hope you enjoyed this harvest video and our reflection. If you did, don't forget to give us a like, leave us a comment, remember to share and subscribe, and most importantly, remember, when you're with us, you are good to grow.